Yannick, can you please begin by telling us a little more about who you are and, what it is that you do exactly and what is existential coaching?
Hmm. Yeah, sure. The the simple "Who are you?" question. So there's a factual answer and there's an existential answer, and I think everybody has to find the existential answer for themselves. But like, I came into this space through an endeavor to do something that won't be boring anytime soon. I think that was my starting point. Coming out of school, having spent some time with myself and doing different things, figuring out what am I going to choose to do that, what are you going to do for the rest of your life now? So lucky enough to kind of found out early that this is kind of my pattern. I look into things and I try to figure out how they work, and then I kind of do that, and then I kind of draws me to something different. So that's where I got to studying psychology and figuring out how the human mind works. And that's what got me to London. So in London, I then got in touch with positive psychology. And that was kind of, just kind of fell into it as one of these many coincidences or not as they happen. But they got me to explore what is right with people, and what are the resources that we are being given in life, and what's happiness all about. We're all seeking for some form of happiness, arguably, not necessarily just positive emotions, but also meaning and self-acceptance and good relationships and a sense of growth or change. So we have that in us, and it was really useful to kind of open up that space. But then I quickly realized, well, there's much more shit that life throws at you on a regular basis. And I needed an approach to working with people, which ultimately I was interested in, ideally one-to-one, because I really like that kind of relationship with people. But I needed something that I would appreciate, that life is really hard. It's tough. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of dilemmas, paradoxes that we experience as part of being human in the world with other humans. And at some point we die, and we don't know when, we don't know how, and we want to belong, but we also want to be ourselves. We search for meaning, and we're these meaning-making machines in a world where we can't be sure what the overarching meaning is. So we create all of these stories around that, and we try to make decisions when we're certain about things. But what can we ever really be certain about? So all of this, I was aware of it because, I was a human being who was quite reflective. But in the kind of standard positive psychology coaching or performance coaching, that wasn't really involved. That got me into the existential space. And for me, looking at existential philosophy, but with my positive psychology lens on, was really, really helpful in providing me with a framework to make sense of people and, who they are and what they do and who I am and what my relationships are with other people and with myself and with the world. So they got me a framework to grasp that everybody could understand once you translate it from the complex, convoluted philosophy into everyday terms. Everybody knows this eerie feeling, this, as you called it earlier, like this perpetual existential crisis that we can feel when we pay attention to it, when we become still. And I think this is a global event of, like, many people didn't have time to become still, but there's many, many, many people who had this forced pause button pressed, and if they're lucky enough to be supported by their government, they didn't have to worry about money immediately. They were still taken care of by their governments. Many, many, many people are not in a fortunate position like that. But for many people, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't go out. You were forced to sit with yourself and the people who are in your immediate vicinity. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of these questions popped up, and that's what fascinated me so much. So kind of jumping into the topic area already, but I've done a master's in existential coaching. I've been teaching it for many years. I've been running a coaching master's at the University of East London for 3 years, which is where we met. And I've been interested in all things kind of personal development and what it means to be a human being, and how do we navigate this thing, and how do we not go crazy in the process? How can we find and create meaning and happiness in life? That's what I've been having conversations around and exploring over the past, I guess, over 10 years now. And here we are talking to each other about what the fuck is going on.
Exactly. Yeah, just a small question, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously the main thing I want to go into today is like the recent events, but then obviously it's not as if there weren't big existential questions going on before, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, maybe I want to ask you first, generally, like, what is existential coaching? So if someone comes to you, what could they expect?
Mm-hmm. So existential coaching is I guess coaching is a conversation. It usually happens between two people, but can also happen in a group format where, let's just call it two people for simplicity, come together to help somebody figure something out, reach a goal, become somebody new, do something different, gain clarity and understanding on something. It's a space that you hold where somebody can think, feel, be, figure out some of the big questions or some of the smaller questions. Who am I? What's the purpose of my existence? To, what job am I going to choose going forward? Or how can I triple my income? All of these things are kind of in the coaching realm where we want to help somebody move forward, and the existential bit in coaching is that it's based on the philosophy that I kind of touched on, on themes such as authenticity or responsibility or commitment, of isolation, not just the physical isolation as many of us experience in these pandemic days, but the kind of isolation of, I want to belong to a group, but I'm also wanting to stay myself, that nobody can really truly understand me. And yet I keep trying to connect with people to build a relationship, so I can feel a sense of belonging, when actually I'm unique and I can never fully 100% merge with somebody else, or, there's always some form of friction in life. And how can we be okay with that kind of friction, perhaps even learn to embrace it and gain energy from it? So big questions around, where do I belong? Who are my people? What do I want to leave behind? What might be my legacy? But also, I just can't decide for things like lunch or which socks to wear. And I'm so indecisive with things, where does it come from? So in my experience, pretty much all of the questions that somebody brings into the coaching room, something that they need some help figuring out, they usually underneath that are some of these existential concerns, some of these big questions around uncertainty or identity or meaning, endings, temporality. All of these areas are important. And so an existential coach, they will listen to you and they will help you figure things out. They will, I certainly will, I have a big picture hat on. So I naturally take a step back and see at what else is there. What does that actually mean? So we just dig a little bit deeper into your experience and then help you figure out how to move forward, either despite the thing that holds you back from it and makes you feel uncomfortable, or perhaps we can relieve some of that discomfort so you can move forward in a smoother way.
So you're saying, like, even when somebody comes to you saying they can't decide on a seemingly small thing, it kind of turns out to really be a deeper question of who am I, or my reason for being here anyway.
Well, I'd say more often than not, there's something behind that, especially when it's a pattern. I mean, it's rare that somebody comes to coaching to buy a new phone or, which socks to wear that morning. But once you identify an indecisiveness on some things, there often are certain patterns, and they often talk to a certain relationship with bearing uncertainty, for example. And I guess, again, this is where we're right in the material. What is your relationship with uncertainty? Some people crave the excitement, the aliveness that lies in not knowing. Whereas like that they really revel in it. It's like going to a football game and not knowing what the outcome is going to be. People don't generally want to know, or we don't generally read the last page of a book first. We don't want to know how it ends. That's where the excitement is. Not knowing is something we crave, we enjoy. If we knew everything would be pretty boring, and life would be like suck the juice out of it. But then there's people who, I'm sure we all know some, it might be you, who just like we crave knowing. And often we have both. I crave knowing and I crave not knowing. I want excitement, but I also kind of want to know, because when we know, there's a certainty in that. And isn't certainty nice? As long as there's not a general certainty for everything all the time. That would be horrendous, I think. But that's the existential paradox, right? We want it, but we also don't like it. It's not a comfortable thing, but depending on how we position ourselves towards uncertainty, we can find meaning in it, not necessarily comfort.
Is there maybe a threshold of uncertainty? So like, I'm okay with some things being exciting and unknown, but only if I have this level of stability in some area of my life.
Yeah, I think what we often do is we seek out uncertainty in the framework, in like a safe frame. So, for example, we might watch a horror film or a thriller where that we don't know. We seek the not knowing, but we know we're not actually in danger. We can actually leave the cinema or stop watching it at any point in time. Sports is one of those as well. It's like there's no personal risk involved, but we can still immerse ourselves in this uncertain space. So I think that matters, but you can't quite compare it to really being in it. I think this is why the entertainment industry is so big, because if you can't decide anymore, if you suspend your sense of reality and you're actually getting sucked into the movie, and you're fully there. I always appreciated, always kind of felt a little bit envious of people who can sit next to me in the cinema in the Blair Witch Project, and their emotions imply that their life is in danger, and to really let go and allow yourself to be in an experience and not distinguish anymore between reality and this is a movie. Then you can experience it all without actually being in danger. So
I'm wondering if you've seen a difference in the last few months in people you work with. Like, is the increase of actual real perceived danger making people maybe less tolerant of general uncertainty?
Yeah, I think first of all, we should distinguish between the general uncertainty and an existential uncertainty, because and even within that there is a physical existential danger. There is a virus and it might kill you. There's a real death possibility, and yes, the probability is still relatively low, but it's certainly way higher than a lot of diseases that we have experienced. Especially if you're at risk. Yes, when you're young, maybe it's more likely to get hit by a bus when you go out in the street, than dying from COVID. But certainly there's a real existential risk element of it. The existential uncertainty, the philosophical uncertainty is much bigger than that. There's a general fabric in life, something that you can't quite figure out about anything. What can we really be certain of? If I choose to leave my room right now and walk through that door, I might not be able to. I cannot be 100% certain that that's going to happen. because somebody might stop me. I might have a heart attack, or maybe my wife locked the door while I was in here. Maybe a meteor hits my house. I don't know. So even something that I'd bet a lot of money on that I'll be able to walk out that door right now, I cannot actually be 100% certain about it. So, and that can really get to people, that can really start questioning a lot. And I think this is the difference between the physical existential threat and the philosophical existential threat.
Yeah, and I would maybe ask, have both been really activated during this situation, right? Because philosophically, maybe people's sense of identity is now in question if they can't continue with their job or career path. Maybe there's questions of, well, who am I now? The world is changing. There's no more normal, right? Like, what does this mean? And the added, physical existential threat of, well, maybe I'm going to get this thing and die, or, not just COVID, right? But climate change. We've got someone here who's like in California with these fires happening right now. So can you tell us a bit more about these two types of uncertainty, and maybe, how do we begin to, navigate those things?
Yeah, what came up for me is the people who currently live through this. We've been waiting for, a lot of people have been waiting to get back to normal, and then other people have started to talk about the new normal. Something I like, I watch a lot of zombie shows, and I really like the philosophical aspects of it, because in a way there's a lot to compare here, because usually there's some event that changes the world. And then there's a group of people that is waiting for things to go back to what they know. And then there's other people who adjust to the new reality and kind of try to find their way in it. And I find that super interesting to observe. It seems to me that those people who accept that the world has changed and then kind of be in it, seem to have an advantage, at least in those shows. The people who hold on to going back to what was are usually the ones that are being disappointed. But then also it would make for less exciting TV if at some point it just goes back to normal. But existentially, it cannot ever go back to normal. It's impossible to go back to something that was. We can maybe reestablish certain guidelines or ways of interacting, certain levels of safety or financial stability. But it's impossible existentially to go back to something that was, because we're always in the process of becoming. Something's always changing. So I think letting go of the world that was is helpful. And I mean, this will stay with us for some time. The other thing that happens in those shows that I noticed, which I think is also very relevant to what's going on in the world right now, and I can certainly observe in the coaching room, is that those people who accept that there's a new normal or that the world has changed, they now have an opportunity to be a different person in that world. A global event like this can be a catalyst for you becoming a new person. Because if somebody just decides, and I see that in the coaching room all the time as well, somebody decides to be a different person without a specific event, just because they wanted to, or perhaps an event that was invisible to others, something that they've been sitting with that didn't share it. They go out to see their friends and they're now somebody different, but the friends don't know that. And they kind of react strangely to that person being different now, reacting different. And it's quite a difficult process sometimes to integrate the new you into the world that hasn't changed. But if there's an event like this, it's a real opportunity for people to be different, to do something different, to become somebody different. I don't want to be one of those kind of positive psychology stereotype coaches who say, oh, what a wonderful opportunity this is. No, there's a lot of suffering and there's a lot of carnage out there, and it's not a great situation. My wife is Mexican, and it's really, really difficult what's going on in the country. So I don't want to say that this is an opportunity that everybody has to use, but I'm saying for a lot of people who are fortunate enough to perhaps not be directly affected in terms of their health, and in terms of their livelihood, there's definitely an opportunity there to evolve. Something has changed. There's a significant global event, and that can trail off into different ways of being. And I think a lot of people asking themselves questions right now about how am I being? Who am I without my job? Who am I without my industry? I have a lot of friends in events. There's no events. Who am I without having money, without having a job, without doing what I'm passionate about and what I'm good at, without the things happening that I usually spend my time in. Who am I as a person if I'm just hanging around? What do I actually like? So these questions that are coming up, and they're important. And when we discuss them and we give them a space to come up and reflect on them and, work through them, we can be different. We can do things differently.
Yeah, it makes me think in a sort of existential sense, right? What is identity anyway? So I suppose we create this idea of who we are based on the external factors around us and how people react to us, right? And I've heard a few people who suddenly they don't have this constant feedback from a group of friends because they're not able to have that social contact anymore. So people are almost thrown into this void, right? It's almost like if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it still make a sound? If I'm not working in this job and with these people, am I still me? So yeah, how do you deal with that if people come to you and their whole sense of identity is completely shaken? What do you do?
Well, to answer the question straight is I would listen and I would reflect back what I hear. And in somebody expressing those thoughts and that kind of going through that process of figuring things out, I'll hear somebody, I'll meet somebody. I might meet somebody who's inquisitive or curious or funny or straightforward or anxious. What's somebody's relationship with not knowing? How courageous are they in meeting this? Do they see it as a challenge, or do they see it as a punishment? Do they see how do they make sense of something? Tells me about that person and who they are. How they approach the world, how they approach themselves. Even if they feel like, my God, who am I? There's like some significant layers of my identity have just crumbled and collapsed. What's underneath? Existentially, sometimes I have this exercise where I ask a group of students to write down finish the sentence, I am, and just have them slap as many labels on top of them as possible. I am a man, I am a teacher, I am funny, I am German, whatever that might be. And then one by one, to strip them away as a thought experiment. Who would I be if I weren't German? Who would I be if my sense of humor was gone somehow? Maybe, it can be difficult to imagine, but for example, imagine you're moving into a different culture and they just don't get your sense of humor. Then all of a sudden you're not funny anymore. Maybe to yourself you still are, but it doesn't work anymore. What would that be like? What if you didn't have money? What if you weren't a teacher? What if you couldn't speak? What if you had an accident and you couldn't walk or move your body anymore? Who would you be? You're still there? So those questions, they get closer and closer to the core of existence, to what it's like to be there and nothing else on top of it. That's what Sartre talked about when he said, well, existence precedes essence. First and foremost, we're there. Heidegger talked about Dasein, which literally translates as being there. Just being there. That's what the existential philosophers have been thinking about. What is the meaning of being? What does it mean to just be there? Because that's core to so many other things. Everything else comes afterwards. Rousseau said, well, I think, therefore I am. The existentialist might say, I am, therefore I think. So I think in those times now that many people kind of fell into a bit of a void around identity and have those layers stripped away, I think they get a little bit closer to the experience of existing, of just being there. And it's not necessarily comfortable. It's a bit unsettling because those labels, they often give us stability and certainty. I know who I am because I am my job, or I am this person with this character. I have this family. We often are defined by our friends or by the people around us. Social status. Well, what if that is all gone? Who is left? And I think an experience of what that is like is a bit unsettling, maybe uncomfortable, but if we've come in touch with it, maybe we can have an experience of who we are deep down before that. And if we make our peace with that, then the layers on top, they matter less, because we know who we are underneath, or we know what's it like underneath.
My practical side wants to come in and ask, how does that show up in day-to-day living? So I can definitely get to that very beautiful universal state of just existing and being when I'm meditating or when I'm thinking about it. But then, you got to go and work and pay the bills and worry.
Somebody comes at a dinner party and says, hey, so who are you?
You
or
do,
the more usual, what do you do?
Worst question. I just changed the subject.
But that's what they're asking. If somebody asks you, what do you do? Really, I think what most people want to know is, who are you? What are you passionate about? How do you define yourself? Tell me something about yourself. It's just more awkwardly phrased as, what do you earn a living with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to the physical existential threat as well, right? So obviously this whole thing has maybe brought up a lot more of that realization that we're all mortal. And I wanted to ask, how does existentialism generally deal with that? Because I suspect that our Western culture is quite afraid of discussing death and accepting death as a reality, when in fact, of course, it's the only certainty we have, right? So how does that work within the realm of existential coaching?
Yeah, well, first of all, just a little anecdote, because I've said the exact same words as you just did. It's really the only thing we can be certain of is that we die, or that at some point, our body ceases to exist. And, whatever you believe in terms of an afterlife, if there is one, if there isn't one, what form might it take? What we do know is that the body decays, after an amount of time. So I was saying that in a classroom of 13-year-olds, and Chuck from Jamaica said, well, sir, you're old and we're still young, so they might find a cure for this death thing. And I really wanted to argue with it, but I realized I couldn't with any degree of certainty, because with a nauseating speed of development in nanotech and biotech, it's actually imaginable now that within my lifetime they might find a way for the body to reproduce cells. And how long does the mind last? Well, we couldn't possibly know. So that bugs me a little.
There's no
Yeah. So, but I think it's a very important point that you touched on, is that there's this global reminder of endings, and death as the ultimate ending is something that existentialists talk about often. And it's very important, because only if things end does it provide meaning to what lies in between. If we had all eternity to do that thing that we wanted to do, what's the point in doing it now? What's the point in doing it tomorrow? So I guess there could be a point to it for various different reasons. But like, certainly there's a reminder that our life might not last as long as we might think, or that our jobs might not be as secure as we had imagined them, that even whole countries might collapse under the pressure of what's happening at the moment. You know, I experienced it that when I grew up, being a doctor is going to be a high paid job and it's going to be secure. Doing certain jobs were just a safe choice, and it's just no longer a safe choice. There's just so many people looking for jobs. So it's not just a physical threat of endings to your life or to your livelihood or to your health, but it's endings that regard industries, or jobs or relationships. And we often like to live in a way that we don't really think about that stuff. We like, it's much nicer and more comfortable to live not having endings on our mind. Jason Silver once had this little video called The Existential Bummer, where he talks about that we sometimes get sad when we're in love, when we just fallen in love, when we're in this infatuation stage, you know, because we might have an awareness that this one of us is going to die. Actually, both of us are going to die. And like, even if it goes exceptionally well and we spend the rest of our lives together, then at some point I'll lose you, you know, and I'm so in love with you right now. It's a difficult feeling to be with because it's both end, right? So I think this, we'd like to live without this awareness of endings. But I think this has been a global reminder that many things are not as stable as we'd like them to be. And that's difficult to accept. So a lot of people don't accept it. And I've seen the rise of conspiracy theories, and I've had lots of conversations. Yes, some conspiracies are actual conspiracies. They're out there, you know, but then there's absolute bogus conspiracies or theories about, you know, the royal family being lizards and COVID-19 not being a virus and not being dangerous to people, being made up or fabricated in order to, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there. And I the way I make sense of that is that there's people who do not accept the reality of things. If we can claim that there's a reality, I do believe there's certain objective truths, like this is an actual virus and we can take it apart in the lab. And many people have done that in many different labs. And it's impossible, maybe not impossible, it's so unlikely that I would call it impossible for that to be fake. So it's out there and it's killing people. And it might be easier, more comfortable to believe that there's a reasonable explanation rather than this being an absurd event that nature has thrown at us. It's much easier perhaps to believe that somebody's behind this, that there's some sense to this, that it's less absurd. And that can be really comforting to people.
Well, what obviously comes up when you say that is the thought of religion and superstition and all the different ways that we try to deal with absurdity, right? And I mean, you know, I have my own beliefs, and at the same time, I intellectually tell myself, well, you're probably just believing this to make sense out of the chaos and the absurdity. So, yeah, maybe I joined one of your pub psychology, right, nights where you talked about conspiracy theories and why are people maybe spreading these more frequently at the moment. And obviously, you know, one of the main conclusions is that need for control, right, and certainty. So when we can't grasp the, yeah, the sort of size of what's going on, and we're not biochemists, so we don't really understand how viruses work, it's the easiest thing to do is to try figuring out something that makes sense to us, right? And so if you already hated the government, then of course finding some way that it's their fault is the easiest way. But I've also seen people who are like, oh, this is a gift from the universe so that we can get rid of all of the toxic systems that are choking the planet. You know, these are nice stories. But at the same time, I guess from a philosophical standpoint, there's just absurdity, right? And so all of these things are a way to deal with that.
Yeah, it depends on the philosophical standpoint, right? Even within existentialism, there's a positive existentialism, which I might call it, because I see it as inherently liberating and freeing to believe that, to consider the possibility that there might not be any sense to all of this, you know. But it's also, I can see how easy it can be to slip into the nihilism area of existentialism, that I think is often in the public domain as an understanding of like, oh, we're all going to die and nothing means anything, so life has no meaning. You know, no, we constantly create meaning in life. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it, is that if there are no rules at all, and we coming from this underlying assumption that this might all be absurd, then I can attach meaning and I can decide what's meaningful to me. I can create meaning even in suffering, you know. And this is what people like Frankl have told about Viktor Frankl, who was in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. You know, he found that the people who survived this kind of hellhole were the people who felt they had a why to live for, so they could bear almost anyhow. You know, and Nietzsche also wrote this at some point. So that's the thing. Even I can't know with any kind of certainty that this is an absurd abomination of nature, and that sometimes these things happen. Actually, it's many people have said that this will be happening. It's just a matter of time that there's a virus, and some people are even said we're quite lucky that it's not as deadly as it could have been. But like, if we were to assume that this is absurd and consider the possibility, which seems to be a really difficult thing to do for many people, we don't like absurdity. It's difficult to be with, you know. It's difficult to be with a nothingness. Well, there can't be nothing at the core of existence. Like, there got to be something, right? Because I would want to believe that there's something. I want to believe in a God that is all good and all knowing and is looking out for me. And after my body decays, I'm in this place where I'm going to be happy eternally. You know, I would want to believe that. It's difficult for me to do that, you know, because there isn't any evidence. There isn't any evidence that life is just nothing afterwards either. So I'm a believer, but I like what comes with that belief. I like the comfort that I can create my life between now and when my body ceases to exist. You know, I'm not relying on a force that hasn't revealed itself to me yet. And I respect people who had experienced this force having revealed itself to them through either a mystical experience and they became religious, or maybe a psychedelic experience and they've developed any other form of kind of spiritual religious concept. But if at the core this may be absurd, then I'm in charge of creating meaning in it, and I own it. You know, but that also means I own it when it doesn't go well. So I have to be with that too.
So you said there's these different branches of existentialism. So nihilistic is, yeah, what I often think people go to as well. This kind of, oh, it's all absurd and meaningless and there's no point in doing anything. And yeah, can you tell us a bit more about that? Because I know we had someone who's here today who started to talk about meaning, right, in the introductions. I think it was Guido saying about feeling that loss of meaning and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of meaning structures have collapsed in the last couple of months. And if we look at meaning as something that we construct these maps of meaning, we construct these different layers of it. We attach meanings to certain jobs or relationships. We attach meaning to our sense of authenticity, identity, stability, you know, certainty. So everybody has a very different composition of these meanings. And when these kind of events happen, whether that's on a global scale or whether it is on a personal scale, you know, something gets disrupted. And if it's something small, like we've thought about ourselves as a good, honest person, and then somebody tells us that they don't like us, you know, but how could you not like us? I'm this person. But the reality that they don't like us might be very obvious. So we can't really dispute that. Sometimes we can tell ourselves a story while we're still a good person and really honest. But if we then catch ourselves having lied to somebody, then that can cause this crisis. Now there's something that is like doesn't go together. So we're now in conflict with ourselves or with our beliefs. And when something like the pandemic happens on a global scale, some of these meaning structures collapse. So now we can be at a much larger scale in that kind of conflict. How do we figure that out? We don't like to exist in conflict. At the same time, some sort of conflict is inevitable. So now the conflict is not just something we can tell ourselves a story about, but this is not something we can ignore. This is something that is in our face, and we're going to have to deal with it. And that's why part of me appreciates what's happening, because a lot of people come face to face with some of the stuff that they've been suppressing for years. And some people have really been dealing with a lot of stuff. So if we focus on the people that are not dying, and that's horrendous, but the people who had a forced pause where they needed to reconsider some of these concepts of who they are and who they spend time with and what they spend time on. How many people have realized that they don't actually like their job, and that perhaps it's time to do something else? Or some people have realized that they don't actually like their partner or their friends, now that they actually spend a lot more time with them, so that causes a lot of questioning, and with that also a lot of suffering. But it's still something that ultimately I think is a useful thing, a very painful thing potentially, something that disrupts a lot of things. But philosophically, I think it can be a really useful thing if it's managed well, if it's faced with courage and talked through. And, usually when people go through a major crisis, years later, many of them will tell you that that was a significant point in their lives, and that they didn't like it, but that they're somewhat grateful that it happened, because otherwise they wouldn't have made certain decisions or certain changes in their lives.
I'm wondering what your thought is on this, because I was thinking as you said that, one of the big things that I hear said a lot now is this forced pause is causing people to finally face traumas they'd repressed, or to finally take a critical look at their life. But then I've also read a lot that being in this uncertainty and this low level stress kind of thing, like it's a not high level, but you know what I mean, it's like the brake is not on, so it's like the gas is being gently pushed for how many months has it been now? So I wonder, is it always that people realize they don't like their friends or partners, or is it just that constant stress is stopping us from being able to think clearly? And are we ourselves right now?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily constant stress, although that often that is in the same spectrum. But it's in existentialism we talk about distractions a lot. Heidegger talked about idle talk. The kind of stuff we talk about, kind of nothing. We just kind of talk about something for the sake of talking. Stress is part of that. Many organizations have it built into their structure to keep their people as busy as possible, so they can't really question what they're doing there and whether there's any meaning to that. They provide just enough meaning to keep the machine running and people not question. Because once people start questioning, problems emerge in a well-oiled system. So the people who've designed those systems, they have an invested interest for the people in those systems, perhaps not to question it too much. The smart organizations or smart holders of systems, let's say, have understood that we need some people to question certain things, because there needs to be change in systems for them to be sustainable. But a lot of people questioning what's going on right now is really difficult. It's really disrupting. And so a lot of people have an invested interest for people not to question. And I think in a lot of countries, the whole education system is is based on forming people who are not necessarily questioned a lot, when the whole point of education was supposed to be teaching people how to question and develop and sit with that questioning with courage. I think what they don't teach us very often is that it takes courage to question and then to sit with that questioning, and particularly with being questioned. Because it's easy to question when you sit in a well-formed structure of knowing what the world is like and how it works. If you've built your worldview and you understand people and yourself in the world now, it's easy for you to question other people's way of lives. But it's more difficult to really listen to other people. And I think, Ellen, you mentioned a Trump supporter in a previous group. It's difficult for me to listen to somebody with a very different political ideology, because my mind immediately wants to go, but I'm right and you got it so wrong. How could you possibly believe that? And me saying, how can you possibly believe that? Ideally, that wouldn't be a question. That would be, you shouldn't be believing that, because that's absurd. But listening to it and trying to make sense of what's going on there, this new normal at the moment that so many countries that, I'm in touch with, I know people in, are so deeply divided. What's going on in the mind of somebody who really pushes my buttons and triggers me all over the place? What happens when I really listen to this person and figure out what is going on? How did they develop those kind of beliefs? I mentioned conspiracy theories. There's a friend of mine who started questioning a lot of things during this pandemic. And I know her. I know her quite well. We haven't spent a lot of time together in recent years, but she didn't seem the kind of person that would, believe bogus stuff. She's an intelligent human being and I respect her a lot. So I'm like, what's going on there? What's happening in your mind that this kind of stuff has access to you? That's so. I kind of lost my train of thought how we got there.
Well, I want to ask you another thing and then maybe open it up for everyone to ask questions. But okay, this is a huge question. But moving from the kind of the individual level, right? Because I can imagine a lot of people are at home going, okay, who am I without my job? But then it also seems that, as a society or as humanity, we're having these same questions, like, who are we anyway? Is this system the system we actually want? And when there are these questions hanging of, is the financial system going to collapse? Are countries as we know them now still going to be a thing? The whole climate change thing, like, are we even going to be here as a species by the time our children grow up? These kind of things. So I don't know what exactly my question is, more of just this reflection of, it's happening on all levels, right? So there's also these huge conversations going on about who are we, and I guess it's very hard to really have those, because I've joined a lot of Zoom calls where small groups of people are having those conversations, but it seems to me that we can't have those conversations seriously because we're ruled over by a bunch of people with very low philosophical intelligence. They don't want to have those conversations about who am I? Why is my sense of identity rooted in me being the most powerful person in the room?
And yet, whole countries have this conversation right now. America is asking itself, who am I? What kind of country am I? Who are my people? The UK has been going through Brexit, deeply divided on that issue. So I think these existential conversations, these existential concerns, they are happening not just on an individual level, but they're happening on a societal level, and in some ways on a global level when you talk about that in the context of climate change. So we've always taken our planet for granted. We hadn't really considered that in our kids' lifetimes we might face mass extinction. We're already facing mass extinction, but it's one of those things that it's much easier to ignore that if it's a couple of species that, you know, are birds in South Africa, or, you know, some insects here, and you know, the like um, some mammals are obviously more disconcerting, but like when it's people, it's much harder to ignore. And I think that's where we're getting at, even though I'm astonished by the power of some people to ignore things, you know, to ignore findings or warnings, and to kind of just adjust their worldview and tell themselves this story of, you know, how these institutions like NASA or the WHO just making stuff up, so that they can continue living the life that they know. We hold on to things that we know so forcefully, you know, we're so attached to things not changing, when actually we need change. If things weren't changing, we wouldn't be happy, we'd get really depressed. But we're holding on to this ideal that is no longer tenable to uphold. It's just not going to be possible. The world is moving too quickly, you know, and if anything, we need to move much faster with the times and with the developments than resisting that change. And I think adaptability is one of our greatest strengths as human beings, and we should be able to use it. And yet we're holding on to these things that are inevitable to change, and that's a real issue.
And one more question. Do you think this is generally just something that humans do, or do you think that also possibly our generation has been a little bit, you know, wrapped in cotton wool? Because I'm pretty sure, for example, you know, change and adaptability and resilience were just things you always had to do through most of human history. But I feel like we've become, I don't know, it's like we were lied to as children, right? Like, this is the world, it's always like this. You don't have to worry about those things because the grown-ups are dealing with it. And I think this sudden loss in systems and institutions, maybe your friend with the sudden conspiracy theories, it's like the day you learn Santa's not real, you know, you're like suddenly, oh, the government isn't going to look after me. I can't actually trust them.
Mm.
So what does that mean for us? You know, are we like a generation of children finally growing up now?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because like people like you and me, we're talking from a very privileged position, right? We've gone through our pain. I've certainly gone through my pain, and some of that pain felt that as if I was actually dying, but really it was just, you know, a relationship ending, or I didn't get what I want, or, you know, I didn't get the job I wanted, or, you know, whatever else felt like my world is collapsing. And I don't want to take away from that kind of pain. It's real, and it does feel like you're dying, but I can't compare myself to somebody who's actually faced physical death on a regular basis when they were growing up, or abuse or heavy trauma. You know, that stuff is out there. So even now, like I mentioned, my wife is Mexican. There's no support from the government. You know, there's so many people living hand to mouth. They cannot afford to be safe. You know, I talked a lot about, you know, people having a lot of time to ask themselves questions. There's people who don't have that kind of time. They're just taking more risk of dying right now, and they need to keep working, because otherwise, how are they going to eat? Um, but there's something to what you're saying. There is a generation of people who grew up in conditions like ours, who have kind of been shielded, and we've grown up in a time of great economic growth. You know, the post-war generation laid the foundations for a lot of growth, and of course, it had this kind of things come in waves. Um, but there's certainly, I've grown up with very little concerns, that, you know, very little question that things are going to be okay, you know, and that's a wonderful space in which to grow up. You know, if we can create that kind of safe bubble for a child, I think it's wonderful while you're forming, and then bit by bit you start putting in questions into that kind of framework, you know, so that you have a safe basis from which you can grow and explore. And first you need to develop the courage, and then you can start questioning. You know, we all know pain, because, you know, we're hungry and that's painful, and then we get fed, hopefully soon, you know. But in the way that these that we're growing up, we're having those experiences, there's a certain psyche that gets formed. So if we know, if we have experienced that life is generally safe and okay and we're going to be fine, we can still open our bubble. We can choose to open our bubble and let things in, you know. And existentially, I believe that either we choose to open that bubble up and peek outside, and it might be uncomfortable, but we have the courage to actually go explore there and allow those questions to come in, perhaps even seek them out. Because if we don't do that, the bubble will get burst, and that's inevitable. We will be faced with meaninglessness and death and isolation. These things are just going to happen. You know, the existential concerns, we will meet them. There's no way around it. And we can either do it in a way while we still have a safe bubble to go back to, or we can wait until the bubble gets burst. And I think a lot of bubbles have been burst right now. And I think that's what the fuck is going on. You know, that a lot of people cannot just stick their heads out and then go back into their safe bubble, because the safe bubble is no more. And some people recreate a bubble that's made out of very questionable material. And that's a difficult place to be in. I have a lot of compassion and empathy with people who exist in that kind of bubble right now. And whether that bubble is made out of conspiracy theories or other theories, other narratives, that they're there to protect them. And we can't forget that. You know, that bubble exists for a reason. It's a protection bubble. You know, and sometimes inside the bubble, it might be playing out worse for you than if you were outside, but the bubble is protecting us. So as an existential coach, I encourage people to look beyond their bubble while they can still go back to one. And then at some point, perhaps decide to dismantle it or thin it, or perhaps burst it yourself, you know. But it's never a comfortable process when a bubble bursts, you know, because it's nice in there. You know, we know how things work in there. It's a comfortable space where we know how things are going. It's like, I like my bubble. People know me here, you know? And so I think that's what's happening at the moment. That's why it's so difficult, because there's no bubble to go back to unless we create one. And that's a, you know, a risky thing.
Yeah. And I can't help but think we've failed our generation, or we've been failed by not having this kind of education at school, right? Like existential conversations, questioning, you know, how our sense of identity is constructed. Because when you grow up believing like this is the world and it's unchangeable, and then one day it changes, then that's kind of its own form of trauma, right? Yeah, like the first time I experienced an earthquake in Japan, I was like, what the fuck? The earth isn't just a stable thing under my feet. You know, it's really pretty shocking. But I have stolen a lot of your time, and I want to give other people the opportunity to ask some questions.